I remember the moment I fully understood I was alone. It hit me like a wave, sudden, choking, impossible to ignore. The sterile odor of the hospital room pressed into my nostrils, and the faint click of a nurse's shoes in the corridor seemed to mock me with each step. She passed by without even glancing in, probably assuming I was resting, that everything was as it should be, family seated around me, or at least on their way. But the door stayed closed. The phone stayed silent. I had never realized how loud emptiness could be. I lay there, faint from the anesthesia that still clung to my veins, trying to recall the exact moment when my life veered down a path where those closest to me would abandon me in my hour of need. My side ached, a deep pulsing reminder of the surgery I'd just undergone, and tears of self-pity stung my eyes. Yet I forced myself to keep them in check. Crying felt too much like surrender, and I'd already been forced to surrender my dignity. There I was, helpless, in a flimsy gown, tethered to tubes and wires that beeped and dripped, with not a single face from home there to remind me I mattered. Sometimes, I couldn't believe I had let it come to this. It was easy to blame them for not showing up, but the deeper truth that gnawed at my heart was that I had made choices, year after year, that led to being taken for granted and eventually left behind. Everything had come to a head in that small hospital room, white walls glaring under fluorescent lights, reminding me that I was only as visible to others as I allowed myself to be. The hours stretched. Every 30 minutes or so, a nurse came to check my vitals. She was always kind, though tired, and I'm sure she believed my family was simply stuck in traffic or waiting outside. "Is there anyone I should let in to see you?" she asked once, her gentle voice cracking slightly from a long shift. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a small smile. "No," I murmured, "they're probably busy." That phrase, "they're probably busy," drove a hot knife of anger through my core. Busy doing what exactly? My children were adults, sure, but if they'd told me they needed me, I would have been there in a heartbeat. My ex-husband, well, it was too much to expect him to drop everything, but I thought my children, our children, would at least be present. Yet no one had so much as texted me beyond a perfunctory, "Hope it goes well," message. I was too proud to beg or demand. I was too exhausted to send out reminders, to claim a spot of their day. And so I laid there, each lonely minute hammering in the point that everything I'd given, all the sacrifices, all the tears, all the times I bent over backward, had earned me nothing but an empty room. I steadied myself with a slow breath and told the nurse I was just fine, that they'd be by soon. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. In the endless hush of that space, I allowed myself to drift back to earlier days, tracing how it all started. I was the kind of mother who believed in unconditional love. The kind who gave so many yes, it never even occurred to me to say no. Over time, that shaped our family into a dynamic I couldn't quite escape from. I poured my soul into those around me, and somewhere along the line, they started taking it as their right rather than my gift. Then came the cracks in my marriage. My ex-husband had that superficial charm that attracted all sorts of admirers, but beneath it was a manipulative streak that kept me tethered to him for far too long. He would dismiss my efforts, shame me into silence, or twist my concerns back onto me as if I were the problem. But I held on, thinking I was doing it for the children. Over the years, that pattern eroded my confidence. By the time we finally separated, I found myself in a half-lost state, unsure how to define myself or what boundaries were allowed to look like. And as the kids grew up, I tried to keep their relationships with him civil, stepping aside to make room, hoping they might see how I quietly stepped in for them whenever they needed help. I drained my personal savings for their college tuitions, bailed them out of tricky financial moments, was always there on the other end of the phone when they called in distress. Yet when I required help, well, I suppose that phone didn't ring so often for me. The day before my surgery, I had texted them both. I recall how I typed something along the lines of, "I'll be going in for surgery tomorrow morning, probably out by the afternoon if all goes well. Just wanted to let you know, in case you wanted to visit." The text might have sounded casual. Maybe I should have phrased it differently, stressed the severity. I discovered a growth that needed to be removed, something the doctors caught early. It was supposed to be routine, but it was still frightening. Anytime they put you under anesthesia, there's a risk, and I'd never been more aware of my own vulnerability. My eldest replied with, "Oh wow, you'll be fine, Mom. Let me know how it goes." My younger one didn't reply until hours later, with a quick, "Good luck." There was no mention of coming to see me. "No? Should I drive you home? Or do you want me to bring you anything?" They had their own lives, yes, but a corner of me still believed that deep down, family meant we showed up, especially in times of uncertainty. And yet, I let them brush it off. I even texted them the morning of my surgery, telling them which hospital I was at, just in case. Then I turned off my phone and tried to brace myself for the procedure, my heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and a faint, desperate hope that I'd see one of their faces by the time I woke up. But, of course, they weren't there. Hours slipped by, and the only messages I got were from the hospital staff, ensuring I was comfortable or verifying my insurance details. I lay still, hooking onto the beep of the heart monitor like a lifeline, thinking about how many times I'd driven them to their own medical appointments, how many nights I'd spent awake in worry when they were ill or in trouble. It's not that I needed a grand display of gratitude. I just wanted someone to hold my hand, to promise me I wasn't alone. It wasn't until the nurse asked for my emergency contact that a wave of humiliation drenched me. When I hesitated, her pen paused over the form. "Do you have someone?" she asked softly. I just nodded and mumbled my daughter's name, but deep down, I wondered if that was even appropriate anymore. Could she really be my emergency contact if she wasn't even here? Still, I gave the nurse her number. It was better than nothing. Through the window, I saw the sky shift from morning's pale light to the golden flush of late afternoon, and with each shift in color, my hope drained. No footsteps, no voices in the hallway that meant anything to me. Just that echoing hush. That night, in the loneliness of that bed, I had a nightmare about being surrounded by crowds who only took from me. I saw images of me opening my wallet, giving away my last bits of change, rummaging around for more money, searching for a kind word, only to turn around and see that people had disappeared. The next morning, I woke covered in sweat, the 4-line tugging at my arm, the beep of the monitor an unsettling soundtrack. When the surgeon came to see me, they said the procedure had gone well, but they wanted to keep me another night for observation. "Do you have anyone to help you at home when you're discharged?" he asked. I hesitated. A swirl of shame and anger rose in my chest. "Of course," I said. "My family." The lie stung, but I wasn't about to let him see the truth that I had no one waiting for me. The echoes of their absence made my heart pound. I decided to call my eldest daughter that afternoon. She picked up on the third ring, her voice distracted. "What's up, Mom?" she asked, and I could hear some background noise, maybe a TV or someone else talking. I forced a light tone. "Just calling to let you know the surgery went fine. They want me to stay a little longer, but I'm okay. Thought you'd want an update." For a few seconds, silence. Then a dismissive sigh. "Oh, that's good. Glad to hear you're fine. I've been busy with work. Things got crazy at the office." I tried not to show any bitterness. "I understand," I replied, my voice faint. "Maybe you can visit tomorrow if you have time?" She hesitated again. "I'll see what I can do," she said, then ended with, "Anyway, gotta get back. Take care, Mom." Click. The line went dead. I let the phone fall to my lap, blinking back tears, feeling a strange numbness settle where I once held motherly pride. I told myself that maybe she was just stressed, that I should have given her more notice. But a deeper voice inside me was screaming, "Enough. Stop lying to yourself." Evening came, and still, no one walked through the door. A volunteer rolled around with a cart full of books and magazines for patients. She offered me a battered romance novel. I accepted it, though I couldn't focus enough to read. My mind turned over the past. I recalled a day long ago, in the early years of my marriage, when my ex-husband had left me stranded with a broken-down car. I'd called him, frantic, and he'd simply said, "Figure it out." Then he hung up. A neighbor ended up helping me, and I'd told myself it was just a misunderstanding. But it was a clue, a harbinger of all the emotional abandonment that would follow. Over time, each small betrayal, like not showing up when I needed him, hurt more than if he'd outright yelled or cursed at me. 1,000 cuts, slicing away at my faith in us. And now, after everything, it seemed that my children, in-laws, everyone, had learned to treat me the same way, as if my needs could be set aside, as if my existence were background noise. The parallels haunted me. I stared at the window, the sunset colors bleeding into the sky, and wondered if I had raised them to believe I would always be there, no matter what, and so I required no reciprocity. I told myself that once I left this place, things would change. I'd set boundaries, I'd demand better. But fear coiled in my gut, whispering that maybe it was too late. Maybe I taught them too well that I was disposable. The next day passed much the same way. My younger daughter sent a single text, "Glad you're okay." My phone felt heavy in my hand. I typed back a curt, "Thank you," not trusting myself to express the avalanche of disappointment inside me. No mention of visiting or helping me home. By noon, the nurse told me I was clear to go, but someone needed to sign me out or at least help me to a taxi. That was when reality sank in. I had no one. Not my children, not my siblings who lived out of state, not even a friend who knew about the surgery. I'd kept it so private, wanting to handle it on my own, never imagining I would end up in a situation where even basic support was out of reach. Swallowing my pride, I asked the nurse if I could just call a cab from the hospital. She gave me a sad smile and nodded. I hated the pity in her eyes. I hated myself for needing it. So I made that call, dragged myself into the back seat of the taxi, and let the driver take me to my empty home. Once inside, the quiet was worse than the hospital. At least there, the beeping machines reminded me I was still alive. When I saw the stack of bills on the kitchen counter, my mind drifted to the insurance forms I'd updated earlier in the year. I had covered both daughters for certain benefits. Even my ex-husband was an emergency contact for some of my policies, though not a beneficiary. I had never questioned my role as the caretaker, the provider. And in that silent kitchen, with the taste of abandonment still fresh, an idea began to bloom, dark and defiant. If they could not be bothered to stand by me, to offer basic compassion in the moments I needed them most, why was I carrying them on my shoulders financially? Why was I the one paying extra premiums, ensuring their medical coverage, coddling them like they were still children in need of constant security? The bitterness I felt fueled the thought, and it was as if some long-ignored switch flipped in my brain. Maybe it was time to stand up for myself in a way I never had. Maybe it was time to let them feel a fraction of what their neglect cost me. My hands shook as I stared at the documents, recalling how many times I'd gone without so they could have whatever they wanted. And in that moment, I decided I wouldn't pay for them anymore. I wouldn't keep giving what was never returned. Sleep was elusive that night. I dozed off only to jerk awake with a start, as if expecting to see one of my children appear in the doorway, asking if I was okay, apologizing for leaving me in that hospital all alone. But the hallway stayed dark. Shadows clung to the walls. My mind raced with memories, both good and bad, flashing in a kaleidoscope of images. I remembered Christmas mornings when I'd go out of my way to make the holiday special, only for them to tear open presents and vanish to their rooms without a word. I remembered birthdays where I planned surprise parties, while my own birthday was often just an afterthought. I remembered phone calls where I listened for hours to their complaints, their heartbreaks, their struggles, without any real reciprocal question about how I was doing. Over time, it had taken a toll. But the hospital stay was the final straw, the glaring sign that I had no place in their priorities. Come morning, I got out of bed and started searching my files for everything related to the insurance. A cold resolve steadied me. This was my chance at self-respect. Still aching from the surgery, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the dining table. It was the same table where we'd shared so many family dinners, back when I believed those dinners meant something. But now, the chairs stood neatly tucked in, as if waiting for guests who'd never come. I examined the policies, reading through the terms, the coverage details. My mind swirled with the memory of signing these documents, a mild sense of pride that I could give my children a safety net if they ever fell ill or faced an emergency. I'd never considered that they might not bother returning that concern. With trembling fingers, I picked up the phone to call the insurance company. In that moment, I felt a surge of guilt. It was as though decades of conditioning wanted me to stay quiet, to keep paying, to keep nurturing. But I reminded myself of the hospital bed, of the cold staff corridors, of the silent phone. Enough was enough. I dialed the number. A customer service representative cheerfully greeted me, asking how they could help. My voice faltered at first, but I steadied myself. "I need to remove 2 dependents from my policy," I said. The representative asked for verification, ID numbers, all the usual details. Each question felt like a test of my resolve. But I persisted. When it was done, the representative confirmed the changes would take effect at the start of next month. I thanked her and hung up. My stomach churned with a blend of triumph and sorrow. I felt lighter, but also strangely hollow. Was I being petty? Possibly. But a deeper part of me recognized that this was more than petty revenge. It was a declaration that I was done being the sole pillar of a family that gave nothing in return. If they wouldn't show up for me in the most vulnerable moment of my life, then I had no obligation to keep them under my financial wing. And so I took the first step in reclaiming my own worth. I didn't tell them. Not yet. I wanted to see if they would even notice. Days slipped by, and my phone remained relatively quiet. Occasionally, my youngest would send me a random meme or a short message about some trivial matter, never once asking how my recovery was going. My eldest was silent, too busy, adulting, in her own world to check on me. The only real calls I got were from telemarketers or the clinic reminding me about a follow-up appointment. Each time that phone rang, my heart would leap in a mix of anticipation and dread, thinking maybe they'd had a change of heart. But no, it was always someone else on the line, or that hollow beep of an automated system. In that vacuum, I found myself with a lot of time to think. Memories I'd buried started floating to the surface. I replayed the countless times I'd shown up for them, the hundreds of lunches packed, the fees paid, the consoling words offered. And then I contrasted that with the present, the hush of my house that served as a potent reminder of their absence. My emotions ranged from heartbreak to fury. Sometimes I found myself mourning the mother-child relationship I wished I had. Sometimes the anger made me want to scream into the quiet. And sometimes I felt a grim acceptance creeping over me. Perhaps this was my reality now, a mother invisible to her offspring, a woman no longer needed or respected, yet somehow free from their demands. When my follow-up appointment day arrived, I almost canceled it, dreading that humbling feeling of walking in alone again. But I forced myself to go. I drove myself to the clinic, parked, and sat in the car for a moment to gather my courage. The waiting room was filled with families, people helping an elderly parent or spouse. The sight made my eyes sting. A nurse called my name, and I followed her to a small exam room. The doctor examined the incision site, declared everything was healing well, and asked about my support system at home. "I'm managing," I said simply, not wanting to delve into the truth. Maybe he saw the flicker in my eyes, but he didn't press. Once I walked out of that clinic, a renewed sense of determination filled my lungs. I would never again let them reduce me to that helpless figure in a hospital bed, wishing in vain for their presence. I deserved better, and I would take better for myself if no one else would grant it. That evening, I decided to do something I hadn't done in a while, make dinner just for myself, something decadent, a reminder that I could enjoy life even alone. As I prepared the meal, I kept waiting for my phone to light up, for one of them to say, "Mom, how did your follow-up go?" But it never happened. I sat down at the table, the same table that once held the laughter of my children, and ate quietly. Each bite tasted both lonely and liberating, as though I were dining with my own independence. That night, I slept better than I had in years, dreaming of wide-open roads and bright skies, as if my future could be anything I decided to make it. The next morning, a call from my ex-husband jolted me awake. My heart pounded. He rarely called unless he wanted something. The moment I answered, I heard his smooth, practiced voice. "Heard you were in the hospital," he said, not sounding too concerned. "Why didn't you let me know?" I almost laughed. "I did let our children know," I replied evenly, "so I assumed one of them told you." He hesitated. "Well, they mentioned something, but I just wanted to make sure you were all right. You sounded a little upset in your texts." I closed my eyes, controlling my anger. He always knew how to deflect blame. "I'm fine," I said coldly. "Thanks for asking, though it's a bit late." He made a few more meaningless remarks about how busy he'd been, how life was hectic. I said nothing. Eventually, he got to the real reason for calling, some financial question regarding one of our daughters. I answered tersely, and when he asked if I could provide additional funds for her, a dry laugh escaped me. "No," I said, feeling a flicker of pride at that word. "She's an adult. She can figure it out." He sounded taken aback, maybe a little irritated. Then he mumbled something about me being selfish before hanging up. The nerve of him. Selfish? I stared at the phone, my thoughts swirling. They had the gall to label me selfish after leaving me alone in the hospital. It stung, but it also hardened my resolve to stand firm. If they saw me as selfish now, fine. Maybe it was about time I was a little selfish after decades of martyrdom. The days turned into a blur of routine. I went back to work part-time, answering polite colleagues who asked if I was doing all right after my procedure. For a while, I told them I was fine, just the usual minor surgery. But occasionally, a coworker would ask if my family helped me out. I'd smile and say I managed, leaving it at that. My stitches healed, and physically, I felt stronger with each passing day. Emotionally, though, I was wrestling with the knowledge that the shape of my life had fundamentally changed. I was less naive. If my own children could abandon me at such a critical time, then the illusions I clung to about unconditional love and family bonds were shattered. There was no going back to being that giving, unquestioning person. In those moments of private reckoning, I noticed that a flicker of empowerment had taken root in my chest. It told me, quietly but insistently, that I could redefine my role in this family and beyond. I could decide how I wanted the next chapter of my life to read, and maybe it wouldn't revolve around them at all. It wasn't long before the insurance changes became noticeable to them. My youngest called me, her voice tinged with panic. "Mom, I tried to make a doctor's appointment, and they said I'm not on your policy anymore." "What happened?" I could almost picture her standing there, eyes wide, phone clutched in her hand. I felt a tremor of satisfaction run through me, but I kept my tone calm. "I removed you," I said simply. "You're working full-time now, aren't you? You should have coverage through your job." She stammered, "But I like your insurance." "It's better." "Why would you do that?" My anger flared. Why would I do that? Had she already forgotten everything? I bit back the words that threatened to spill, the raw accusations, the righteous fury, and instead I said, "I needed to cut costs, and I realized you and your sister are independent adults now." It just made sense. For a moment, silence on the line. Then she demanded to know if I could reinstate her, said it was inconvenient, that she didn't understand why I wouldn't help my own child. I almost snorted. "Do you remember my surgery?" I asked quietly, my voice shaking despite my attempt at composure. "Do you recall visiting me, or calling to check on me, or offering to drive me home?" She started to say something, but I kept going, the words tumbling out. I laid in that hospital bed for 2 days alone. No calls, no visits, no one asking if I needed help with groceries, or if I was scared, or if the doctors gave me good news. So I decided maybe it's time I stopped paying for people who don't even bother to show up. A stunned silence enveloped the call. Then she muttered, "You're being dramatic." "That's not fair." My laugh came out hollow. "Life isn't fair," I said, and hung up. The trembling in my hand was matched by a strange sense of relief. For once, I'd spoken my truth. Not long after that, my eldest tried calling. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was clipped, annoyed. "Mom, did you remove me from your insurance too? I went to pick up a prescription and they said it wasn't covered. Call me back." I didn't call her back immediately. I needed time to think. Something inside me was shifting, a lifetime of people-pleasing warring with a surge of newly claimed self-respect. I kept the phone tucked away, letting her stew. Eventually, she showed up at my door. My heart thundered in my chest as I let her in. She looked polished in her work clothes, that city-slick sophistication on the surface. But behind that, I saw the same child who used to cry when her toy broke or cling to me when she was scared. Now, her face was hard with irritation. What is going on? She demanded, crossing her arms. I can't fill my prescription because apparently I'm not on your plan anymore. I nodded slowly, motioning for her to sit down. She didn't. She just stared at me, eyes blazing. You removed me without even telling me. How could you do that? My hands were cold, and I interlaced my fingers to steady myself. You're an adult, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. You make more money than I do at this point. You can get your own insurance. It's time. She scoffed. Time for what, Mom? This is such a hassle. You know my job's insurance is terrible. And it doesn't even cover half the stuff I need. I felt a wave of anger, but also sadness. This was what our relationship had come to, a transaction, something measured in deductibles and out-of-pocket costs. I'm tired, I said, trying to keep my voice from breaking. I'm tired of being used, of being an afterthought, of giving everything and watching you all walk away when I need you. Remember the hospital? Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to lie there alone, with no one to even help me to the car when I was discharged? Nobody cared enough to show up. That's what you left me with, and I'm supposed to keep footing the bill for your comfort? Not anymore. She stood there, stunned. For a second, I thought I saw a flash of guilt in her eyes. But then her expression hardened. It was just surgery, she muttered. We all get busy. You didn't exactly say it was life-threatening. Her dismissive tone made my blood boil. I shouldn't have had to say it, I snapped. I'm your mother. If you had surgery, I would have moved mountains to be there. You couldn't even send a message to check how I was. Just a quick text. That's all it would have taken. So, yes, I removed you from the insurance. My voice trembled with passion, with heartbreak. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Eventually, she whispered, So that's it? I'm cut off because I didn't play perfect daughter. I swallowed hard, a bitter taste flooding my mouth. I never asked for perfect. I asked for human decency, for compassion. If you can't even muster that for me, why should I keep sacrificing for you? She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, pulse racing, tears burning my eyes. I felt an odd mix of grief and relief. We had never spoken to each other like that before, raw, no sugarcoating. And yet, it was the truth we both needed to hear. In the hours that followed, I half expected her to call back or return with some apology. But there was nothing. Just the same quiet I'd grown used to. My mind reeled with conflicting emotions. I wanted them to feel sorry, to realize how their neglect hurt me. But I also felt a flicker of fear that maybe they'd sever ties completely, leaving me in an even deeper loneliness. Was that a risk I was willing to take? I sank into my armchair, the weight of decades of disappointment pressing down on me, wondering if a mother can truly ever stop longing for her children's affection. Days went by. I kept a stoic front, reminding myself I had done the right thing, that this was about reclaiming my worth. My ex called again, berating me for putting the girls in a difficult position. He said something like, You know they're used to that coverage. Don't you care about them at all anymore? That little jab nearly tore me open. Of course I cared. I'd spent my entire life caring. But I clung to my resolve like a shield. They're grown, I said firmly. They can figure it out, just like I figured out how to get home from the hospital on my own. He huffed, calling me heartless. I hung up on him, a small tremble in my fingers. Heartless. That word echoed in my mind long after the call ended. It felt so unjust. If anything, I had too much heart, poured out so much love that there was hardly any left for me. Now, I was simply keeping a fraction of it for myself. One afternoon, my younger daughter stopped by. She tried a gentler approach, saying she was sorry if I felt hurt, but that things were hectic. She said something about how I should have communicated my needs more clearly. My frustration spiked. Do I really need to spell out that I want my children by my side when I'm in surgery? I asked. She looked down, fiddling with the hem of her shirt. I guess we assumed you'd be okay, she said. Her voice was quieter, less defensive. I stared at her, absorbing the words. That's exactly it, I said, exhaling a shaky breath. You always assume I'll be okay. That I don't need anyone. That I'm fine to handle everything on my own. Maybe that's my fault for never showing weakness. But I needed you, and you weren't there. She sank into a chair, eyes glistening. "I'm sorry," she murmured, and I believed she meant it in that moment. "I really am. Dad said you were making a big deal out of it, and I guess I listened to him. I didn't realize it meant so much to you." A painful smile tugged at my lips. It shouldn't be about me having to spell out how much it means. It's common sense, courtesy, love, whatever you want to call it. When someone is vulnerable, you show up. She nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. My walls began to soften just a little. But the conversation shifted when she asked me to reinstate the insurance. "I know you're mad, but I can't really afford my own plan right now. It's so expensive." A wave of disappointment swelled in me. So this was the reason she'd come, an apology laced with a request. "If you're truly sorry, show me by being there the next time I need you," I said. "But I'm not paying for this anymore. Not unless I see a change." She looked wounded, but she didn't argue. She just nodded, stood up, and walked to the door. "Okay," she said softly, "I understand." Then she left. I exhaled, feeling both proud and heartbroken. I had drawn a line, something I should have done years ago. And it stung, but it also felt right. Life settled into a new rhythm, one where my phone rang less often, but my sense of dignity grew a bit each day. I poured myself into work, took up small hobbies I'd neglected, and found a surprising calm in my solitude. Even the house began to feel different, like a space that belonged to me, rather than a hotel for family members to drop by when they wanted something. I reminded myself of that hospital bed whenever regret crept in, recalling the beeping machines, the intravenous lines, the cold realization that no one was going to walk through that door. That memory served as a steady anchor, reminding me that I wasn't being cruel. I was simply refusing to be taken advantage of anymore. Weeks later, a legal letter arrived for me. It turned out my ex was filing for some kind of financial adjustment, claiming that I had a responsibility to maintain insurance for our adult children, an argument based on some old clause in our divorce settlement. My heart hammered as I read through the legalese. A wave of disbelief and anger coursed through me. He was truly stooping to this level, trying to weaponize the law to force me back into caretaker mode. The children were both over 26, legally no longer eligible under standard policies, but perhaps he thought he could bully me into compliance. I pressed my lips together, scanning the letter. It mentioned a potential hearing, the possibility of forcing me to pay a penalty if I breached certain terms. Anxiety fluttered in my stomach, but a part of me was done being afraid. I picked up the phone and called my attorney, an old friend from years ago. We talked it through, and he assured me that once children are adults past a certain age, the standard policy doesn't obligate me. "He's bluffing," my attorney said. "But we can respond formally if need be." I thanked him and hung up, leaning back in my chair. My ex was trying to guilt-trip me and now intimidate me legally, all because I had dared to stand up for myself. That alone told me I was doing something right. Sure enough, the next few days were a flurry of texts from him, demanding that I reconsider. He called me every name in the book: selfish, cruel, vindictive. It brought me close to tears at times, reading his accusations. But then I reminded myself of the countless times he'd let me down, the endless ways he'd chipped away at my confidence. I reminded myself that standing firm now was the only way to salvage what was left of my spirit. So I held the line, responding with curt messages that all legal queries should go through my lawyer. He eventually gave up the threats and tried the sympathy angle, saying how it was hurting our girls. But that, too, rang hollow. Where was all this sympathy when I was lying in a hospital bed, waiting for a friendly face? Gradually, my children began to interact with me in new ways. My youngest started calling more often, not always to talk about insurance or money. She sounded cautious, maybe even trying to build a bridge. We chatted about small things, her job, her plans, my day. I could sense her grappling with the changes, unsure if I would still be the same mother she took for granted. My eldest, on the other hand, remained distant. She texted me a few times, always with a formal tone, as if I were a business associate. I tried not to let it bother me, but it did. Memories of her as a little girl, crawling into my lap for story time, clashed with the cold distance in her messages. Still, I held my ground. I wasn't going to make it easy. If she wanted a mother, she had to act like a daughter. All the while, I found my own sense of self growing. Freed from the burden of constant caretaking, I had time to reflect on who I was beyond being their mother or his ex-wife. The lines in my face told a story of sorrow and resilience, and for once, I looked in the mirror and acknowledged them without shame. I bought myself clothes I liked but never splurged on before. I joined a small group at the local community center, an art class for novices, and found that painting landscapes helped me channel the swirl of emotions inside. Each brushstroke felt like a tiny rebellion against the old me, the one who never took the time for self-expression. As the days turned cooler and autumn leaves began to change, I felt my own transformation unfolding in tandem. There were still pangs of loneliness and regret, especially on quiet weekends. But something deeper than that regret was blossoming, a realization that I could survive on my own. That maybe, just maybe, I could flourish. One afternoon, as I was cleaning out a closet, I stumbled upon an old photo album. In its pages were captured moments of birthdays, vacations, and everyday life. My girls in matching pajamas, me smiling at the camera, my ex-husband standing stiffly to the side. My throat tightened. How many illusions had I woven around these images? We looked happy, but behind each photo was a story of me struggling to keep everything afloat. My eyes lingered on a snapshot of us outside the hospital when my eldest was born. I remembered the raw emotion of that day, the fear, the pain, the overwhelming love that washed over me the moment I held her in my arms. I had promised myself that I would always be there for her, that she would never question my devotion. And I had kept that promise, far beyond what most would deem reasonable. Now, all these years later, it took one hospital stay to see how little that promise had been reciprocated. The betrayal stung, but so did the realization that I had enabled it. I closed the album, pressing my palm against the cover. A swirl of sorrow and acceptance settled in my chest. It was late that night when my youngest called, her voice hushed. "Mom, can we talk?" she asked. I could hear the tension in her tone. I wondered if she was sitting in her car or pacing in her apartment. She sounded smaller than usual, almost childlike. "Of course," I replied, my voice softening. We talked for an hour, maybe two. She confessed that she felt guilty about not visiting me in the hospital. She admitted that she'd been wrapped up in her own world, that she thought I was just making a fuss. When she said that last bit, I tensed. But she clarified that she realized now she was wrong. She told me she had a nightmare the other night about me dying in a hospital bed, no one around, and she woke up crying. My heart softened. I wanted to cradle her in my arms the way I did when she was small, reassure her that everything would be okay. But I also knew that letting go of the bitterness meant holding on to a new set of boundaries. "I appreciate you telling me," I said quietly. "I hope you understand why I did what I did with the insurance. It's not that I don't love you. It's that I can't keep giving while you all stand aside." She sniffled on the other end, her voice quavering as she apologized again. I felt tears rising in my own eyes, but I pushed them back, trying to stay composed. "Do better," I said gently. "That's all I ask." She promised she would. We ended the call on a tender note, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe we could rebuild something healthier. But the real test came a couple of weeks later when I had a routine appointment to check on my post-surgery progress. Without prompting, my youngest asked if she could come with me. I agreed, half expecting her to cancel last minute. But on the day of the appointment, she showed up at my door on time, face guarded, but earnest. We drove together, making small talk about everyday things, the tension between us still there, but not insurmountable. Sitting in the waiting room with her, I was flooded by memories of doing the same for her countless times: pediatric appointments, checkups, late-night ER visits for fevers that frightened her as a child. Now roles had reversed. She was the anxious one, eyeing me as I filled out forms, occasionally asking if I needed water or a magazine. It felt surreal. When the nurse called my name, my daughter stood up and followed me in. The checkup was quick. Everything looked good, the incision was healing nicely, no complications. While the doctor typed up notes, I glanced at my daughter, noticing the worry lines on her forehead. She met my gaze, and for the first time, I recognized genuine concern in her eyes. It wasn't the perfect family reunion by any means, but it was a step, one I silently hoped would lead to more meaningful moments of connection. After the appointment, she offered to drive me home, and along the way, we stopped by a small cafe. We sipped tea together, the conversation meandering from light topics to deeper reflections. At one point, she sighed and said, "I never realized how lonely you must feel sometimes." I could have let the tears come, but I bit them back. I never let myself realize it either, I admitted. I kept going, always making excuses. But I'm learning now. She reached out and placed her hand over mine. It was a simple gesture, but spoke volumes. For that day, at least, I allowed myself to believe that change was possible. I didn't promise to put her back on my insurance, and she didn't ask. Instead, we talked about how she could manage on her own. She mentioned maybe switching jobs to find one with better coverage, or looking at supplemental insurance options. I told her I'd give her advice if she wanted, but not money. She said she understood. It felt like a fragile truce, but a necessary one. Meanwhile, my eldest remained aloof. Occasionally, she'd send a message asking for details about something: tax info, family medical history, mundane bits of life. She never apologized, never acknowledged my point of view. Over time, I saw her as an echo of her father, harsh, dismissive, unable to see beyond her own nose. It hurt more than I liked to admit. But I refused to chase her down. If she wanted me in her life, she'd have to come around on her own. And if she never did, well, that would be a wound-eyed nurse in private, but I wouldn't let it break me. I'd already tasted the bitterness of that hospital loneliness, and I knew I could face it again if I had to. The end of the year approached. Holiday lights appeared in store windows, and the radio hummed with festive tunes. Normally, I'd be in a frenzy of planning gatherings, buying gifts, preparing a feast. This time, I found myself hesitant to do any of it. The last holiday was a painful reminder of how they came to enjoy the meal, left their mess, and barely uttered a word of gratitude before going off to spend time with friends. Would I be setting myself up for disappointment again? A part of me wanted to escape somewhere alone, maybe book a little cabin in the woods, skip the entire holiday season. Another part of me yearned for a fresh start, a chance to show my family that the old me was gone, but also that some aspects of the holidays could still be salvaged. The tug-of-war in my heart was intense. Eventually, I compromised with myself. I decided to invite my daughters over for a small dinner, making it clear that it would just be us, no extended family, no plus ones. My younger daughter accepted immediately. My eldest sent a curt reply, "Sure, I'll come by, but I might be late." I tried not to let that bother me. The date arrived, and I spent the day cooking a modest but special meal. I didn't go overboard. Just a couple of dishes I knew they loved, some old family recipes. I wondered if they'd recall the flavors with fondness or if it would all pass unnoticed. My younger daughter showed up first, actually offering to help in the kitchen. It felt surreal, seeing her pick up a spoon, stir a pot, ask me how to season something. She even told me about a time she tried cooking for her friends, ended up burning half the meal, and had to order pizza last minute. It was a normal conversation, but something about it felt deeply healing. It was a small sign of reciprocity, like she was finally realizing that I wasn't just a function in her life, but a person she could relate to. My eldest arrived nearly an hour late. No apology, just a hurried explanation that she got stuck in traffic. She breezed in, said a quick hello, and busied herself on her phone. I forced a polite smile, trying not to let her attitude sour the evening. We sat down to eat, and for once, I didn't jump up every 2 seconds to fetch something. They served themselves, passing dishes around, albeit a bit awkwardly. I listened as they talked about work, friends, and random bits of pop culture. Occasionally, I chimed in. The conversation was stilted, but it was happening. Midway through the meal, my eldest put her phone aside and looked at me. "So, how's your recovery, really?" she asked, somewhat stiffly. I took a breath. "I'm fine. Just some lingering aches, but the doctor says I'm healing well." She nodded, her gaze flicking away. "That's good," she said. Then we returned to idle chatter. Still, that was more genuine acknowledgement than I'd gotten from her in months. Progress, I supposed. When dinner ended, my younger daughter actually helped clear the table. My eldest scrolled on her phone, but at least she stayed in the room rather than retreating to the living room. Small victories. I made tea, and we sat there, steam curling in the air, the hush between us punctuated by the hum of the heating system. I wondered if either of them would bring up the insurance again. Neither did. Perhaps they'd accepted the new normal. I felt a twinge of guilt, but it was overshadowed by the relief of finally enforcing healthy boundaries. As the night wound down, I mustered the courage to speak up. "I appreciate you both coming over," I said, my voice wavering slightly. "I know things have been tense." My younger daughter nodded, looking down at her teacup. My eldest kept her face unreadable, but at least she listened. "I don't want us to lose each other," I continued, "but I need you to understand that I can't keep giving without any support in return." My health scare opened my eyes. I realized how vulnerable I am, how much I need to feel that if something happens to me, my family cares enough to be there. Silence stretched long enough for me to count the ticking of the clock. Then, my eldest glanced at me with a guarded expression. "I get that," she said quietly. "I guess I never thought of you as someone who needed help. You always just handled everything." Her tone was almost regretful. My chest tightened. "Well, I'm human," I said softly. "And going forward, I need to feel like you see me that way." She gave a small nod. It wasn't an outpouring of emotion, but it was a step. When they left that night, I stood by the door, watching their taillights fade down the street. A lump formed in my throat, but I felt more at peace than I had in a while. Maybe we wouldn't have a perfect mother-daughter relationship, but we were at least on a path away from the destructive dynamic that had festered for years. And through it all, I clung to the decision I'd made about the insurance. I hadn't reversed course. They'd come to realize I meant what I said, that the old me was gone, replaced by someone who demanded mutual respect. And if they wanted to be in my life, they'd have to adjust. Over the following months, small, positive shifts occurred. My youngest visited now and then, even helping me run errands or picking up groceries. She kept apologizing, in quiet ways, for the hospital incident. I told her I forgave her, and though I still felt bruised, I appreciated her efforts. My eldest was slower to change, but there were moments, a random text to check in on me, an invitation to grab coffee. Each gesture felt like a tiny crack in the wall she'd built. I didn't push or prod. I simply responded when she reached out, letting her know I was open to rebuilding, but not at the cost of my own self-worth. A few times, the conversation about insurance almost surfaced. She'd mentioned something about her new policy frustrations, or I'd mention how I was adjusting my own finances. But we never quite approached the subject head-on. In a way, that was best. I wanted them to learn that I wasn't an endless resource, that they needed to figure things out for themselves. If they resented me for it, so be it. I refused to keep paying for a family that couldn't even show up in my darkest hour. One Sunday, I found myself driving to the beach alone, the sun streaming through the windshield. I parked and walked along the sand, letting the brisk wind tangle my hair. The horizon stretched out, vast and blue, the waves rolling in an endless rhythm. I felt a pang in my heart, wishing my daughters were there, remembering the times we built sandcastles together when they were little. But I also felt a deep sense of freedom. Life was different now. I was different now. Maybe I was finally free to explore who I was, separate from the roles I'd been boxed into. I sat on a driftwood log and gazed at the surf. I could almost see the reflection of my younger self in the water, a hopeful girl who believed in the perfect family. A tear slipped down my cheek. I let it fall, the wind brushing it away. In that moment, I silently forgave myself for all the years I'd let them take advantage of my kindness. And I forgave them, too, at least partially, for not knowing better. I knew we'd never return to the old ways, and for the first time, I was glad. The old ways had led me to that lonely hospital bed. The future might hold fewer illusions, but maybe it could be more honest, more respectful. As time carried on, the tensions surrounding the insurance issue gradually subsided. My ex's legal threats dried up when he realized he had no basis. My children, well, they managed. My youngest found an affordable plan through her job. My eldest grumbled about it, but she, too, found a solution. And though it wasn't as comfortable or cheap as it had been under my coverage, I could tell a tiny part of her respected me more. She never said it outright, but sometimes respect isn't spoken, it's shown in subtle shifts of attitude, in the absence of biting remarks, in the willingness to extend an olive branch. I saw glimpses of that in our interactions, and it gave me hope that our story wasn't doomed to bitterness. We might still have chapters of reconciliation to write. But if those chapters were written, they'd be penned with the ink of mutual understanding, not one-sided sacrifice. I still think back to that hospital room sometimes, the beeping machines, the loneliness creeping in like a living thing. It's a memory I wouldn't wish on anyone, but I also treasure the lesson it taught me. It was a moment that shoved me out of complacency, forcing me to face the truth. I was worth more than being a caretaker without care. That memory is a reminder that sometimes the greatest betrayals are the ones that illuminate our need to reclaim ourselves. And reclaim myself, I did. Removing them from my insurance wasn't just about money or policies. It was a symbol of the boundaries I finally set, a line in the sand that said, I deserve respect, I deserve reciprocity. And if they couldn't give it, then they'd have to learn to stand on their own 2 feet. I'm sure many would judge me, call me cold or vindictive. But those people didn't see the tears I cried or the emptiness I felt as I navigated the aftermath. They didn't see me struggling to hold my head high while I tried not to crumble under the weight of guilt. This was never a simple decision, but it was the right one for me. Sometimes, reclaiming your life demands making impossible choices. I made mine. Standing in the glow of a new dawn, I'm able to say that I don't regret it. If I hadn't done it, I'd probably still be in that endless cycle of giving and being neglected, too afraid to rock the boat. Now, at least, we stand on new ground. The air is clearer, even if it's a bit colder. The steps we take towards each other now are more deliberate, more conscious. That, to me, is a type of love that might actually endure because it's based on truth rather than illusion. And for that, I can only be grateful. Because finally, I've left behind the version of me that cowered in that hospital bed, waiting for someone else to show up and rescue me. I've learned how to stand up and rescue myself. And if there's anything to take away from this story, from the tears and the anger and the heartbreak, it's that sometimes letting go of the old dynamic is the only way to step into the life you truly deserve.